We will try to get to those questions. I have to say, we've had a couple of questions in that are very, very individual and personal about medication, and we can't give anybody advice about taking medication or when to start medication, and that's because we're not medically qualified to do that, so it would be really inappropriate, but we can reflect our own experiences. So we'll try and do that as best we can. We'll also, when we send out the recording, we'll send out some links and some signposting to further information where you might be able to get more help with some of the questions that you've asked that we don't get to. We should have a Q&A box in, and again, if we don't pick all those up during the meeting today, then we'll pick them up afterwards as best we can. So I'm just going to ask the panel to introduce themselves briefly, just to say who they are and where they're based, and then I'll come back to them to do some longer introductions after that. So can I start with you, Linda?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Linda Duddy. I'm one of the regular volunteer with Parkinson Scotland, and I'm quite heavily involved with the family, friends and carers side of things, but I also do some activities and sessions for the Young Parkinson's Working Group.
And where are you based, Linda?
Sorry, I'm in Glasgow.
Perfect, thank you. And Matthew, can I come to you?
Hi everyone, I'm Matthew McKenzie, Care of Lived Experience, and I volunteer a lot with Carers UK, Carers Trust. I have a high focus on those who try and support someone with long-term ill health, and I'm based in London.
Brilliant, thanks Matthew. And Sarah?
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah McCulley-Russell. I am the Policy and Campaigns Manager for Northern Ireland, and I am based in Belfast here in Northern Ireland. And I have been heading up a project called the Parkinson's Who Cares Research, which is all about us engaging with our carers to find out what their needs are.
Fabulous, thanks Sarah. And last but definitely not least, Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm a helpline advisor, so I work on the helpline. So I'm the person who answers your calls when you ring. We always get calls from family and friends. Yes, I'm hoping I can answer some of your questions today.
Fabulous, thanks Kate. So I'll come back to you, Linda, and I just wondered if you could reflect for us your kind of first reactions. Is it your husband who was diagnosed? When your husband was diagnosed, and just tell us a little bit sort of about what prompted you to start volunteering, and tell us about the group and sort of what impact that's had.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, just, no matter what your suspicions or realizing that something's different, you're never expecting to hear that, you've got this diagnosis of Parkinson's disease that's now in your life, and everything's different. So, it really was a bit kind of, we were during lockdown, so we couldn't see anyone, couldn't see family or friends, chat to anyone, and we certainly couldn't see a medical professional. So waiting for that was quite something, I have to say, in your mind, going 100 miles an hour, and you're suddenly just thinking all the things you can't do, and your life is not going to be what you planned. But it kind of that way, I thought, for me personally, I'm going to see what we can do, what can we find out to help. And I was immediately on the Parkinson's website, and from that I realized there was lots of things online. Thank God the world of Zoom had exploded, and we were able to join a sort of pretty much like this, a webinar where for newly diagnosed people with Parkinson's and their relatives. So we had found out there was a local Glasgow group, and we were able to do some of that online before we could do it in person. And I think for me, the minute that we started to engage with people in a similar sort of vein that were ahead of us, there was relief there. No matter what was to come, we knew that there was people we could talk to, there was support around that we could call on to sort of, maybe sort of diminish some fears or keep the anxiety at bay, like a sort of nice fire blanket, just when the flames were sort of, absolutely leaping out, people could go, breathe, just like, let's help, let's talk about it, and really just take a day at a time just now. And that for me was amazing. So fast forward, obviously, as getting things in perspective and what have you, but very quickly, for everything I learned, plus my job, I'm a sports therapist, so I fix broken people, muscle joints and sports injuries. I do acupuncture, so I knew that I could take some of that clinical skills of anatomy and physiology, but develop it for rehab. Even though it was neurological, it would still be between that, and my mother had rheumatoid arthritis, so I was always aware of how to adapt things. So for me, it just seemed a good step that for me to give back a bit of the knowledge that I had, but also the more I learn, the more in control I felt and the less panicked I did. And it's been me for 2.5 years now with the community. So it's been great.
And you're running a support group in Glasgow, is that right?
Yeah. So we have an online Zoom cafe, as we call it, because we're all over the country, we can't meet in a regular coffee shop together, but we log on for a coffee, sometimes a glass of wine, or sometimes even something stronger, depends on how we're feeling. But we're building a friendship. So that's the last Thursday of the month for anyone to join us from Scotland. And that alone has just made friendships for life that, but for Parkinson's, I would never have met. And I'm so grateful to have them around, So there's silver linings sometimes as well. You've got things to deal with, but you've got people who really are in your corner. And that's been great for me.
Yeah, fabulous. And Matthew, I don't know if any of that resonates with you, if you're coming across people who are living with others with long-term health conditions, and whether they need that sort of support, and is it different depending on the sort of family dynamic and things like that?
Yeah, it's always needed. If you're going to end up trying to support someone with long-term conditions, and those who end up in that role, the first thing they usually will do is look for information, and that's a wise thing to do, because it helps if you don't make mistakes, and we all do. You're never prepared for what you expect or unexpect. So if you're trying to support someone, the first thing you're going to seek out is some sort of support, get advice, and congratulations for those who's entered on this lecture today. Really, I see it, this panel discussion, because you'll learn all sorts of things that can help you in your role. So yeah, I do encounter those who are new to the role and those who have been in the role for a long time, and they share knowledge and information and a form of peer support. So it's very common.
Yeah, I definitely think that peer support can be a real game changer, can't it? And Sarah, when you carried out you've done a big research project with carers and for carers in Northern Ireland, and what were the sort of key findings from that? And did you talk a lot about needing that peer support?
Yes, Lenny, we did. And if by magic, I actually have a copy of the report. So this is available to download online. And I suppose to give a bit of context to how the research came about, I'm policy and campaigns manager, and one of my jobs is to engage with the community and find out what their issues and concerns are. And then I campaign to influence change. And I had two carers who were campaigning with me, and we were talking about kind of carers' rights and carers' needs. And out of that, we kind of decided, actually, we need to sit down and talk to our own community to be able to really find out what it is they need. We think we know what they need, but what do they need and what does that look like? So the research was carried out through a series of focus groups. And across Northern Ireland, we had 42 people take part at varying stages of a diagnosis, from very newly diagnosed to people who've been living with Parkinson's for 15, 16, 20 years in some cases. And what that added was a richness to the discussion, because what it showed is, as people progress through a diagnosis, supporting somebody living with Parkinson's, their needs change. But one of there were a few themes that ran through everything. And one was peer support. One was that sometimes supporting, we might have had experience of being a carer before, or people talk about caring roles, but there's something a bit unique about supporting somebody living with Parkinson's, and that relationship that Linda has spoken about, of others in the same situation who can understand it. And that the beauty that we can have out of peer support was very evident across the research, and led to us commissioning a second part. So we've moved from collecting the initial data in the research to now looking at those needs of carers, and one being that they wanted to have peace support in Northern Ireland. And we've gone back out to the community to work with them to say, well, what would this peace support look like? How do you want to meet? Where would you like to meet? Is it meeting in person? Isn't it meeting online? So we've held a series of workshops, and now we're going to pilot some support options and evaluate their effectiveness to make sure that they work for our carers, and it's something that then Parkinson's UK could offer across our organisation.
Yeah, brilliant. So we should have quite a few activities that people who are in the role of that family friend supporter / carer can tap into coming up. So do watch this space for that. And in the meantime, if you want to find the support group that Linda runs with others, it is online, and you can use our search function on our webpage to find it. I want to just move on a little bit to talk. You mentioned about work there, just briefly touched on it. And one of the questions that we've had sent in is about people who may have that care responsibility, but are also working at the same time, and challenges around their employer and even discrimination against it. And I just wondered, Kate, if I could come to you to just explore that a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. So disability discrimination is illegal in the workplace, and all employers are required to make reasonable adjustments to allow disabled employees to work. In England, Scotland, and Wales, disability discrimination is covered by the Equality Act. So this applies to all these nations, consolidating and updating previous anti-discrimination laws. The Act applies in many scenarios, including situations at work, education, for example, in relation to services and public functions. In Northern Ireland, the Equality Act does not apply because it has its own equality legislation, which is Northern Ireland Act 1998. And the main anti-discrimination law in Northern Ireland is the Disability Discrimination Act. So both acts protect employees from discriminations in all aspects of employment, including recruitment and selection, terms and conditions, promotion, training opportunities, disciplinary procedures, performance management, attendance, dismissal, redundancy, and occupational pensions. So Parkinson's UK can support you with offering you specialist employment advice, because we have a specialist team of benefit and employment advisors who can offer advice in all aspects of workplace discrimination and reasonable adjustments and your disability rights. So to access the advice, you will need to phone the helpline in the first instance, and we will then arrange a call back from the team of specialist advisors. We also publish a helpful booklet on work and Parkinson's, which covers disability rights, reasonable adjustments, and gives you an outline what to do if you feel that you're being discriminated against in the workplace.
Brilliant, thanks, Kate. And just to be clear, there are specific rights around carers and people with care responsibilities within those acts, aren't there? So, people who are in a care role are also protected and have those same rights. So
That's
yeah,
absolutely true. Yes.
yeah. And Matthew, I don't know if that's something you've come across at all when you've been speaking with carers about the difficulties of sort of managing work.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's very common. And the reason I reckon that is due to a lot of stigma about long-term health conditions and stigma that carers can face. You know, no one's in a rush to say that they may be caring for someone who's going to impact their work. So I usually tell carers that, you know, and it's spot on what Kate's mentioned, know your rights, as if you're going to end up trying to support a loved one as either family or friend. Familiarize yourself with those acts, Equality Act, Employment Rights Act, and the new one, the Carers Leave Act, specific for those who may end up having to take time off work to provide support and care. There are a few steps. Obviously, if you do feel that you're being discriminated against because, it's now known that you're trying to care for a friend or relative. It's so important that you document it. Obviously not in front of the person doing the discrimination, but, note down dates, times, details of the incidents, any witnesses. Then eventually have a conversation, whoever manages you or the human resources. You can also seek support again, if you're from a trade union, get support from them or a carers advocacy group. And if worse comes to worse, use your rights as a carer. You're gonna have to complain. Hopefully, it won't get that far. There needs to be a lot of education on the rights to make it a fairer society, because we're all going to end up caring for someone one day, and the better society accommodates those that are trying their best to support their loved one, the better I feel society will be.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And is that anything that's come up for you as well, Sarah, in your sort of campaigning work over the years around work? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I suppose the Carers Leave Act doesn't extend to Northern Ireland, so that's one of the ways that we would be slightly different here. And we are fighting for it to be extended to Northern Ireland, but going one step further and for that to be paid, because at the minute you have a right to a week's unpaid leave. And we would like to see that in the new employment bills coming out both in Northern Ireland and across the UK to be paid, because our research clearly identified, luckily, most of the people who took part in our research who were still in employment and carers had flexible employers, but they still were expected to take their leave or work their flexible hours or take their time back. And then that put a strain on them and the time that they had to be able to look after themselves. Because yes, you might be able to get a morning off to go to an appointment, but you still had to make that time up at some point. So one of the things that came out the research of the researcher recommendation for employers was to be more flexible, but also to offer paid opportunities. So paid carers leave, and the same way that statutory maternity pay is in place and statutory paternity pay is in place, and sick leave, to be able to support people who are still working. And the research kind of identified that those that were still of working age had maybe a different set of problems that they had to explore and the support that they needed. So if you're still under working age, you need to explore what benefits are available, what benefits can support you if you're in work or if you have to take time out of work because of your caring role, to make sure that you have all of the financial support that you should have that's available to you. And then and agreeing totally with Matthew about the stigma, that sometimes it can be hard to have that conversation, and there's a lack of understanding that a long-term neurological condition is long-term. It isn't just 1 week here, 1 week there. It is going to impact on a role. And when we have good practice in place, so some employers were brilliant and allowed people to work as and when they needed, where they were needed, and because they recognised the importance of holding a job. Our carers wanted to have their independence, and they wanted to have something that was just for them, that wasn't all about Parkinson's, was what a lot of them said in the research. And their employees respected that and recognised that they were valued, and that made such a big difference when you feel valued and you feel that you can have those open and honest conversations, that sometimes things are hard at home and you need those adjustments in work. And that's what we would like to see, and that's what we're campaigning for, that just becomes the norm in the workplace, that it's just how we all treat each other, that it isn't something that we need to ask for.
Absolutely, yeah. And is that something you've any experience of, Linda, because you're still working? I think you're muted, Linda. I need to get you off mute. Thanks.
I am working, and but I have been self-employed for 29 years, and this is something that I really want more advocacy for, because people assume that because I'm self-employed that it's okay for me to sometimes half my income. I don't get sick pay, I don't get any paid holiday pay. I look after myself and I earn more than the weekly carers allowance allows. But somehow the world, and I'm actually caring for my dad, who also is being in the process of potentially being diagnosed with Parkinson. So I've got it at both ends just now. But I give up most of my day and life around these two people, which is absolutely fine, but no one pays me for that. So yes, I don't have the stress of an employer breathing down my neck, but I do have the stress that I have lost a substantial income in the process for a situation that I didn't ask. And it really sometimes really irritates me that as much as a fight people have with an employer, they do have an employer that might have their back and help them out of it. Whereas when you're self-employed, you don't, you know.
Different challenge, yeah, different challenge. So yeah, so there's some real key takeaways there. In terms of employment rights, we have, you know, you may have a trade union or something like that. We also have employment experts at Parkinson's UK who can support you, and the way to reach them is through our helpline. And something else was, and as Sarah mentioned, if you are really struggling financially, it's definitely worth getting a benefit check to make, just in case you might be dipping in and out of entitlement. But again, our helpline can help advise on that as well. I wanted to ask you now, Linda, about the sort of support that you might offer your husband when he's coping with his diagnosis. And I wanted to ask specifically whether you go along to appointments, medical appointments with your husband, and if you do, kind of what you feel your input is and why it's important.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that comes up a lot in the family friends stuff that I've been involved with, in that, firstly, you know, I really feel for people in these first steps, but also what it might do is we never know what somebody's relationship dynamic was to begin with. Some people are so close and they really talk and they do everything together and they share. Some people don't really have that and they don't really talk, and they've found that they're kind of in a nice wee sort of comfortable sort of companionship role, or they just don't get to do things with their other half. So it really depends on each individual circumstances. Thankfully in mine, we've a very, very open, communicative sort of relationship, and I was straight to the first appointment with John and have never missed one since. And the very first thing that really impressed me was his consultant after dealing with John, who was diagnosed at 49, for those listening. So he was a young onset Parkinson's. Literally had turned 49 by a day, may I add. That his consultant asked me how I was, and I realised then that some people really have the importance of carers, and that really also made me feel better. But certainly we do sort of, you know, how can I best support him? The smartest thing to do if you have that relationship is ask, what can I do to help? Is there something I could do to help? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want left alone? You know, do you want me to come with you or not? I think if you actually have the conversations to begin with, that decides what route you go down. Certainly for me, the best thing I thought I could do to help him was to get informed, but I'm like that. I want to know everything about everything and I want to run into the fire. So if you can tell me the worst case scenario, I know that and work my way back, and then everything's a bonus in my eyes. You know, I'm an eternal optimist. And but for me, the more that I was learning, I could see the John relaxing. Although I didn't share a lot of that with him, he knew I was on it. So if there was anything that's come up, I was going to know the questions to ask the consultant or the GP or the Parkinson's nurse, or if I wasn't sure about, you know, a medication, then, you know, I could ask a question of why they were considering that. So I suppose for me, that was my route, you know, and I like going to appointments because quite often the biggest thing I'll say as a carer, you will see what they don't. You know, sometimes the changes can be so subtle that they don't really even realise there's been a change, but you will. You'll see it, or you'll hear it, or you'll sense it, or what have you. And I think that's important, that the two of you can communicate what you think might be different between appointments. And that gives you, you know, a clearer image all round for the consultant to advise or support you.
Yeah, I think that's a really great tip. And I wondered if you had any reflections about that, Matthew, about the sort of, I don't know, having the right to be there at appointments, and how important that might be for carers to be heard as well as the person who's diagnosed.
Yeah, it's very important. You know, those who are about to support someone, yes, it could be carers, then, you know, how can you care for someone if you don't know your role? I mean, I'm going to give some steps that might help in supporting someone with long-term ill health. And, you know, absolutely right what Linda's mentioned. It's always good to ask if you're going to go to any of those appointments. Ask the person that is going through that ill health. It helps also, you know, let the GP or healthcare provider know that you're going to be coming along, you know, agree with a letter perhaps, or you both go and book the appointment. It's also all about communication and preparation. So obviously the third thing is bring a little list of questions you might want to ask. How can you support your loved one or your friend with that condition? But do remember, it's so important to let, your loved one lead that conversation, because obviously they're worried, they're concerned, and they want to know as much of, the diagnosis or whatever that appointment is about. So the main thing is also to understand your role if you're going to support someone. And if need be, you might even consider asking an advocate to come along. And, Parkinson's UK is the best advocate, I feel, if you're going to be caring for that condition, carers or those supporting in that role can have. And I think
Is that something that carers trusts offer? Do you know, Matthew?
Carers Trust and Carers UK do offer things in general for all carers, but when it's for specific conditions, because they're not all going to be the same, mental health, cancer, long-term conditions, it helps that you have specific advice for specific conditions, and that's where Parkinson's UK comes in. So obviously, yes, definitely use Carers UK, Carers Trust, but anything specific, the more places you can visit, the best, really, I feel.
Yeah, for the expertise, I guess. What about you, Kate? Any input into that sort of people going along to appointments?
Oh gosh, yes, definitely do. Only because the person with Parkinson's may not feel well at the appointment, so it's quite often that they just go in and then come out and just think, what just happened? I forgot to ask all my questions and I don't know what's happened. So if you are a carer, you will need to know what you'll need to do to support that person. So you'll need to be aware what medication they're taking, if there have been any changes to medication, what's the best medication regime for them, has anything new been agreed. So all those things are really, really important for your well-being and for their independence, because the more you are aware, the better you are managing it, the easier it is for you both.
And just on that question then, any reflections from you, Sarah? Any experience to reflect from the work that you did?
Yeah, one of the sorry, I see that Linda had a hand up. Do you want to jump in, Linda, first?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just very quickly, what I will say is, we do come across situations where they don't want you there, for whatever reason. It might be, we quite often find in a male-female role, if it's the male diagnosed, they who might have been the breadwinner, the supporter, they might really feel that they're looking after you, don't want you there because they will still want to maintain your depth of anxiety or worry or what have you, and they're not trying to keep it from you, but maybe they can't quite process it themselves and they just want to target it on their own. And unfortunately, that's really difficult when you want to support them, but you kind of have to respect that. Now, that's going to send you 10 shades of crazy, I'm sure, but that's when we need to get you to have a support role that you can turn to until they're ready to bring you on board with that. You can try and you can stay in the background, but sometimes the best way to support is to let them come to you, and that is so difficult. But it's something to keep in mind that if they do shove you away, it's probably just because they're not ready and they need to get that info themselves, and they're trying to protect you in the process.
Yeah, and funny, I had a feeling, Linda, that was because it was in the back of my mind. I suppose the what we learned in the research, one of the most interesting parts of the research was the discussion around the term carer and trying to even identify yourself as a carer. And we had heated debate of people liked it, people hated it, people didn't see themselves as that. But at the bottom of it all was that relationship. And the most important thing is your relationship with the person living with Parkinson's. And that was the thing that at the heart of everything of the research that we wanted to protect and keeping that person as well as possible. But that was some of the struggles of you're seeing one thing, they're perceiving a different thing, and then they're telling their consultant something totally different. Yes. And trying to manage that void, that gap. And what the research and the focus groups, because we had the different length of living with a diagnosis, we found as the Parkinson's progresses, almost the carer does need to step up in a role slightly more to be able to advocate on the person's behalf because of maybe cognitive decline or an increase in symptoms that they simply can't do that for themselves. So it's that balance of that relationship that they would have discussed. And one of our recommendations in the report was that carers should, when appropriate, be treated as expert partners in care. And that was for medical professionals, because we had some examples, a bit like you shared, Linda, of when a consultant said, and how do you feel? And how has that impact on you? And what are you seeing? But we also had examples when consultants told carers, sit outside the room, you're not to come in, you're not to be part of this conversation, I'm not talking to you. And what the carers and the research identified is they want to be consulted and they want to be part of that conversation, and that to be taken holistically. So it's not that they know more than the person living with Parkinson's, it's just a different perspective. So and that health professionals have within, you have health professionals have respect for carers, but also there's a right there that they're given just as much value as kind of other people involved in the Parkinson's journey.
Also, just for clarity, the reason it is carers is simply for legal terminology, medical terminology. So if you are there having to support someone, you're there because you are their carer. But we all care for our friends, family, loved ones, regardless. Doesn't mean we have to care for them at that point in time. But also when it comes to benefits and finances with, the UK government, you will be deemed a carer because you are assisting someone. I tend to call myself a supporter rather than a carer, and but for those general broad terms, that is the only reason we do. So don't feel that you are labelled as a carer. We don't, but it's just easier. Okay.
Yeah. Did you want to come back in, Sarah? You've got your hand. Yeah.
But just thinking, because I think that's a really good important point. And there's another part about capacity, and there's another part about the legal rights of when you can speak on somebody's behalf, and that would be if you have lasting power of attorney or power of attorney in place, depending on where you live in the UK. There's different terminology for it, but that's conversations that we also had in our focus groups of preparing yourself for down the line, and it's conversations I have in my own family. I'm a carer. But I've had the conversations with my parents. We're quite open about our discussions of how can we make sure everybody is safe going forward? What do we need to think about if somebody is to lose capacity, and we need to be able to speak on your behalf or help to make decisions that we know you would want instead of a medical professional. So it kind of comes, there's at different stages, there'll be different parts and there'll be different areas of when you might have to make decisions on behalf of somebody, but then you need to be able to have the legal position to be able to do that.
Yeah. And I can see somebody's just dropped in the chat there about being a younger person, working full time and not being able to take time off for sort of appointments and things like this. And the last thing we want is for anybody feeling guilty about that. So and because your husband was quite young when he was diagnosed, Linda. Yeah, and how has that impacted on him? Is he working still?
Well, actually, we did sort of get John sort of retired in March of this year at 52. But when, John was 48, when we knew something was wrong, and he had intended working till 60. So I completely understand. And with me having, I've got various bits and bobs in family. So as I say, I've lost lots of my income. So already there was a worry that my income was reduced, and, how is he going to be able to work for 12 years, and how are we going to sort of survive on their mortgage? And that would be worse if you've got younger children. But I think it's one of those things where, you've just got to appreciate that things have a funny way of working themselves out. They really do. But I can understand how they feel about that, but you can't feel guilty, full stop. Nobody asked for this to happen. It's landed on your doorstep. It could be anything. There's so many conditions around and prevalent in the world that somebody's something, and it really comes down to what, Kate and Sarah were saying earlier about having a chat with your employer, because you should be able to be having time off, even if that time off is to stay with the kids while your partner or your friend goes to those appointments themselves, whatever it may be. But if there is a sort of reasonable adjustments, is the term that they tend to use, that they can actually sort of find some time or pick, between you, whether it be a friend or a family member, as Matthew wrote on earlier, an advocate that could go on your behalf, that you feel comfortable that they've got someone with them that you trust, and that you can get the debrief from both of them, at a later date. Then maybe that would help you sort of settle into that a little bit more and not feel quite so bad about it all.
Yeah, kind of wider networks and things. Yeah. So I wanted to move on to something like, if you are in that role and you're supporting somebody, and maybe kind of they are perhaps unhappy for a little while, or maybe they're experiencing some symptoms that might be quite difficult to handle. What kind of thing can you sort of do as a care person who has that care role to try and really get some support for yourself? And I wondered if, Matthew, if you would touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Linny. And, I'd like to reassure those on this call that, it's don't sort of take it out on yourself when things like that happen, because it's quite an emotional journey that you'll have. So the first thing really is understand what the patterns are, understand what triggers it off when someone's unhappy. Avoid retaliating, don't argue with them, just try and understand, get skilled up, come to things like these. And, well done for Parkinson's UK for bringing up this topic, because it can be so frightening and distressing to see that happen to someone that, you love and care about. Do validate their feelings. You might have to, look up on how you can communicate. It's a lot of it is about communication. You can say to them, I can see this is upsetting you. Let's try and work through this. You're sort of playing like a sort of therapeutical role, a therapist role, really, which is you might find if you're starting up in that caregiving role. You're all sorts of person, like a nurse, a social worker. There's something you develop over time. Stay calm and consider, if things do get out of hand, consider physical space if need be. Lastly, when things like that do happen, it's also important to look at the effects in how you can cope with, distress and upset for the person you're trying to support. And as mentioned, remind yourself it's not personal. They don't hate you. It's the condition. I stress that is very important. Also, look after yourself. Practice that self-compassion. You're doing a really tricky role, and you're trying the best you can. You will make mistakes. We're all human. And if you do lash out, forgive yourself. You're human. It's just one of those things. Seek support from your network, family, friends, support groups. And it's not all anger and aggressions. There will be moments of joy and resilience. It's not all about conflict and anger. But it's so important that these questions that have been raised, we get clued up on before we start that journey.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Matthew, and just really important message about acknowledging that you might need support, that you have also had a change that has impacted on you, and that is okay, and it is okay to ask for that sort of support. Do you get many questions about things like that on the helpline, Kate?
Yes, quite often, because caring role is quite difficult, and there are instances when situations change and people just don't know, they're used to one thing and suddenly something happened, so they ring to ask about it. So this could be various scenarios. For example, person just hallucinating, becoming delirious, change to their behavior or their attitude, and it's absolutely normal to not know what to do. So what we normally suggest is that the person, a carer, is entitled to request a carer's assessment from a local council. So what that does, it identifies you as a carer, and it gives you an opportunity to talk with the local authority what support you will need to fulfill and perform your role as a carer. So local authority then can look at the persons who you are carer to at their needs as well, and see how they can support you both. So, for example, they can offer things like respite care for you so you can have a break. If you're registered with your local carers association, they might do like a carer grant, which is a grant that allows you to go and spend a little bit of money on yourself. So they may have things like ad hoc carer coming in to allow you to go out and, perhaps meet a friend for a coffee, go for a walk, go to a class or whatever you enjoy doing. So things are there for you. All you need is just to go and seek advice about them, and we can support with that, with offering that advice. We also offer connecting you with a specialist care advisor team that we have in Parkinson's UK. So that team offers support with everything concerning care, including care arrangements, carers assessment, funding care for your loved one, care options, care choices, and so forth. Really, the message is, if something changes, you need support, as Matthew said, just go out and seek that support.
Yeah, good advice, thank you. And good to know that we've got a dedicated team specifically for people with care responsibilities there as well. Something else that came up was about medication, and about people kind of being diagnosed and then not sure whether to start medication and worrying about it. I was going to come to you about that first, Kate, and then Linda, I'll get your input on that as well. Obviously, we can't give any specific advice, but there are some sort of general things to think about, aren't there, Kate?
Okay, yes. So as far as medication is concerned, so people with Parkinson's, upon diagnosis, are pretty much always prescribed some sort of medication. So medication can be different depending on their symptoms, whether symptoms are strong, whether symptoms are quite mild. So the medication timings and the interval is normally discussed with prescribing health professionals. That could be a Parkinson's nurse or a consultant neurologist. So medication is initially started at a very low dose, because essentially nobody knows how much of the dopamine is missing in the person with Parkinson's brain. So it's kind of a trial and error. So they're given something to try out to see if they react to medication. If they do, that confirms that they have a diagnosis of Parkinson's, and also to see how their symptoms change once they start taking it. So the key message that we always try to emphasize on the helpline is that you need to maintain a good diet around medication. So it means that medication is, you take it either half an hour before food or an hour after you've eaten. You keep to the timings, but it's not really the timing that is so important, is the interval, because that interval between tablets will determine how long the tablet works for you. So by taking the tablet at the regular interval, you keep levels of dopamine in your brain up all the time. So adhering to the interval will then show whether the strength of the tablet works for you, and whether the length of the tablet works for you. Because if you start experiencing something in between, it means that it needs to be adjusted. So it's a really good idea. Start slowly, keep an eye on how you're feeling. If you notice something untoward, any side effects, could be plenty, but not everyone experiences them, and side effects are reversible. Obviously, if you stop taking medication, side effects will then disappear. It's a good idea to keep a diary, and then when you have a follow-up meeting with your health professional, then it's a good chance to talk to them about it, just to how you're settling in.
Yeah, because there might be alternatives and things like that, mightn't there, that if you're not reacting well. And Linda, because what was your sort of your approach with medication?
I had gone into John's appointment with absolutely 100% reluctance to start medication, and came out fully agreeing to start medication. And if you can turn me around, you can turn anybody around. However, again, just having time to reflect as our time passed on, never mind, my volunteering duties, I completely understand, a reluctance or a fear of starting medication. you've just been hit with this news, your life is changing, and now trying to throw all these drugs at you. And of course, people rush to the data sheet and read all the horrible side effects that, and I will emphasize, could happen. Highly likely for a lot of us don't happen, but you often look at that, so then suddenly people don't want to start medication. But then, you know, this is where the crossover is. You know, people can have high anxiety or a real reluctance to start, but is that the fear of the medication, or is that the Parkinson's themselves? Because Parkinson's symptoms, albeit if you don't already know, there's around 40 of them. Things like anxiety, you know, apathy, reluctant to do something new, fear of change, which breeds anxiety, and the anxiety breeds fear to try, to stop, whatever. So now, are you managing Parkinson's with meds, or are you managing anxiety on its own, with or without Parkinson's? You know, so sometimes really the first thing we need to do is actually have someone maybe to speak to their GP about their anxiety levels, first of all. And it might be that just in this processing period of time and settling into your new life, it might be that you need just a bit of a hug and some SSRIs or something like that to stabilize your mood and take the anxiety out. There are various medications to sort of calm anxiety and just sort of make things a bit calmer before you even think about that. So don't be frightened to maybe speak to your GP about your current feelings before you even process about the meds. What I will say is, through loads of research, loads of people, I mean, I've been fortunate to be on all sorts of seminars with people from all over the world, and there's an amazing professor who I follow often. But really, the reality is, from everyone that I've met on a medical professional, is that sooner or later, everyone with Parkinson's will be in some form of medication, and we are going to have this for life, and it will degenerate, you know, at whatever pace it's going to. So there's much more modern school of thought that the earlier you start medication, the better. And I always describe it like my car. You know, we've all done that. You know, you're really down the red line and the petrol station isn't really close by, and you're praying with everything that you have that you can get into that forecourt before, you know, you've run out of fuel and you have to phone the AA. So I always deem that's the way Parkinson starts, that we're on that red line. The dopamine is pretty much empty. So really all the meds are doing, you know, is about topping that tank up to give you much more of the thing that you've lost. And that to me took all the fear out of it. You know, I mean, who wants to run an empty in life, even if you're shattered or you're hungry or you're thirsty? You know, it always feels so good when you get whatever you need. But people are throwing all sorts of vitamins and supplements down their throat every day, thinking it's doing them good. And actually, probably a lot of them are probably doing you more harm than you realise, you know. And if we read the data sheet of them, you would be like, oh my God, you know. And everyone, you know, is an ibuprofen and paracetamol without a second glance. And actually, they're pretty fearful if you read what the side effects of them or the potential. So talk it through, weigh up the pros and cons. If you're not wanting to take something now, have a think about it. But again, it comes back to this peer support. Find people, find a local group. Are they on it? How long have they been on it? How are they feeling? And again, you might react differently, but in my group, you know, everyone's alarm goes off at the same time of the night. You can tell you're in a Parkinson's support group because it's like ping, 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 ping. It's drug time, you know, and I find that hilarious. You know, just like, oh, here we go, right, time for coffee while they sort themselves out, you know, and it's just one of those things. And my husband has gone from 3 times a day on one drug to 5 times a day and added in another drug. And I have to say, there's not an ounce of change on him. You know, it's not affected him. He's not having any horrible issues. But certainly it's helping.
I was going to say, he is being able to be active and he is able to enjoy life. And I think that's the weighing up, isn't it? But definitely,
I feel he's on a half tank rather than a red line is the way you describe him.
If you're concerned about it, talk to your Parkinson's nurse, and do get in touch with the helpline, and do contact us on our newly diagnosed page. We have some frequently asked questions. We also have regular meetings of people who are newly diagnosed, where you can talk to other people who are going through this experience and hear what's happened for them too. So we're kind of getting on with time now, but there was something I definitely wanted to raise because it's been sent in the questions in advance as well, and that is about talking to friends and family about a diagnosis. So I wonder if I could come to you first, Linda, just to see what your take on when your husband was diagnosed. Kind of, were you out and open with it, or was it difficult, and particularly sort of talking to children about the diagnosis?
I mean, again, it will be very different depending on the person's response, but I really thought, I mean, I'm an open book, that I talk to everyone. If I can get it off my chest, you know, that's my way of coping. I'll talk to anyone about it. And but I really did think this was going to be our trickiest area, and that my husband just would not mention it. And then, you know, I would have had to ask permission to go to speak to someone, because I would have gone stir crazy. But to my surprise, he told his family immediately, you know, and then he just went into work and told all of his line managers and his senior boss and anyone at work who would listen, because he suddenly got his head round it, the way sort of lots of other people you've seen in the news about diagnosis is he thought if he could show that he had this, maybe then someone else might get the diagnosis, that they would already know somebody who had it, and that the fear would be removed. So he suddenly turned it into a bit of an advocate himself for, yeah, I've got Parkinson's, but I'm working and this is what I'm doing. And hopefully that opened up conversation. So I was really proud of him actually about how he tackled that. He arranged a night at the pub and then told all his friends that he wasn't drinking, and this is why he wasn't drinking. And they sat down, you know, obviously having that chat. And I don't think they've ever sort of sat down openly and had a sort of proper conversation, you know, other than usually the sports results or what have you. So I thought that was incredible. So, but I also know a lady on one of my groups who her husband 5 years later still hasn't told a single soul. So it's very difficult of how someone wants to navigate that. But how do you tell friends and family? You just tell them what you've noticed, and you know what that is, whether it be, you know, a tremor or a change of facial expression, or, you know, sort of sleeping disorders, or whatever your early symptoms, a change in walking, what might be. You just really say that, you know, I've got something that's changed my body a little bit, but so far the rest of me feels okay, and this is where we're at. We don't know what the future will be, but you know, I'm okay today, but this is where I'm at. So individuals.
Yeah, definitely. And Sarah, have you got any input on that? And then I'll come to you, Matthew.
I think it's very hard, because everyone's relationship is different, and I think for carers, and it can be hard if you're ready to acknowledge it, but the person living with Parkinson's isn't. And that's where we're here to support you. You can call our helpline, you can contact us. We're here to support you as a carer, even if your partner isn't ready to make that step. And sometimes it's about having what the focus group research identified is having your own support networks, having your own opportunity to be able to connect in with people. And a big part of the second phase of the work that we're moving into and doing the peer support is carers very much, sometimes they want to talk about other things that isn't Parkinson's. And sometimes they want to be able to have conversations about their children or what's happening, or just give off about their partner, whoever it is, about whatever that they're doing. And that's sometimes easier to do if it's an aside conversation. So one of the we only had 2 or 3 men that attended the focus group sessions, and their kind of approach was slightly different. If they were supporting that their wife was living with Parkinson's, sometimes they found it easier to tell people as an aside. So if they were playing darts or playing cards or going golfing, the conversation would happen at the same time, and then the pressure was taken off. So it wasn't a big, massive kind of issue. It was kind of slipped in there, and they kind of rubbed along. But I think there isn't one size fits all. And it's about making sure that you're supported so that you can kind of deal with the diagnosis while at the same time supporting whoever it is that you love and care for.
Yeah, and we do have some resources, don't we, Kate, to support with those conversations?
Yes, we in our shop in the information section, we've got booklets. My dad has Parkinson's, my gran and my mom. So these are booklets aimed at children. We also have a fact sheet, which is called Talking to Children About Parkinson's, which gives you hints and tips, just outlines, you know, about how to tell, when to tell, what language to use, just gives an example. So it might be quite useful to have a look at. And booklets are available to order free of charge with free delivery from the shop.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and we also, if you go onto our website and just search the question, in our magazine, there's an article with a couple of little videos and people just talking about how they had that conversation with their families. I'll just ask you quickly, Matthew, if there's anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, the very first thing I'd say to anyone who's going to take on the role is that, it's okay to make mistakes. You're not going to be perfect. And if they're going to have a conversation regarding their loved one with other family members or children, they know them best. So I often say to those who are going to support, being a family friend, just focus on the facts, keep things simple, be honest as much as you can, and don't try and overload too much. But whatever you say, frame the conversation with hope and support, because that's what's really important. But do be mindful of emotions that will come into play when someone's receiving that information. But obviously, because those who are here today listening to this panel talk, use those resources. They're there to help you in your journey when you're supporting someone new with that diagnosis.
Yeah, don't expect yourself to be perfect. But I do hear people who say they've discussed it with teenage children, they've held off discussing it for a long time, and then eventually they say, okay, we need to have this conversation. The kids go, oh yeah, I knew that already, because they've already kind of had a look around and been on the internet and put 2 and 2 together and what have you. Yeah, so we've just got a few minutes left. So I just wanted quickly to touch on physical activity. For people who are recently diagnosed, or for anybody living with Parkinson's, and for any of us, we all know physical activity is important. There was a question came up in the chat a little bit earlier about encouraging people to be physically active. Kate, can I bring you in on that, and about the sort of the range of physical activity as well?
Oh, yes. So, one of the best ways of managing Parkinson's is to be physically active, because they say if you don't use it, you lose it. So, physical activity, it's 30 minutes of physical activity a day. It could be vigorous physical activity, it could be mild physical activity, but what's important that the person is physically active. We across our support network, we have various classes. I would encourage you to check in your local area, because there might be boxing classes, seated yoga, seated exercises. We also partner with Everyone Active Gym, where you can get free membership for person with Parkinson's in Everyone Active Gym. Use of the gym, and also the same offer applies to Pure Gym. You can get free membership. So, but what I would suggest is joining your local group, going for walks. Doesn't matter, we understand it could be difficult, but really is just get out there and just try your best. Don't concentrate on what you can't do, concentrate on what you can do. I always give an example. Our chair of trustees, Gary Shaughnessy, because he runs, he cycles, he jumps with a parachute. I don't know, you puts your coach to 5K to shame, honestly. And he's got Parkinson's. So, um, be active. This is all I can say.
Yeah, and I think, and we have lots of online resources as well. So if you go onto the Parkinson's UK YouTube channel, there is loads of classes, short, long, seated, standing, for all different levels. There's tons and tons of stuff to research, but the research is ongoing. But it's looking like they really are going to be pointing to say that it can have a really positive impact on symptoms and mood and things like that. And Linda, I was just going to say, go on, Linda.
Yeah, nothing to do with what we were talking about earlier, but just to quickly point out that exercise doesn't need to be what we deem as exercise. If you've not been a gym goer, you haven't been a runner and all that sort of stuff, exercising means using muscles. And a bit like we're talking about the tank being in low, it produces that extra dopamine. It works alongside medication or instead of medication if you're not on it yet, to really get that chemical firing up. But using your muscles, it could be joining the choir, because using those throat muscles and your chest muscles and everything, just have a right good sing for stress relief. If you're like me, you would absolutely clear a room. I am tone deaf, but I sing full pelt in my car and I'm the only one that can hear it, which is great. But also Parkinson's Beats have drumming, so they use either yoga balls with some drumsticks, or you can turn a cushion or a washing basket upside down with 2 wooden spoons, and they have a whole series of coordinated movements to some great old tunes that really are doing physical and mental hand-to-eye coordination reactions and so on. It doesn't need to be what you deem as exercise to be exercising, you know, so some of these fun sort of activities are also good to give a go.
Yeah, really good call. And just tell us real quickly in the last 30 seconds about table tennis.
So table tennis is unbelievable. You know, it's something we hadn't done. My husband had played it sort of for about 3 or 4 weeks at school when he was 14 years old, and now he is in the world of Parkinson's table tennis. It is taking us across Europe. You know, we have played in, or he has played in competitions, and it is amazing. When I went to a competition to watch this when we were newly diagnosed, we were on the way to a hotel. We dropped into what was the British Open was being held in Glasgow, and it blew my mind. I saw people coming in walkers, people coming in wheelchairs, and the next thing you know, they're at a table, and I'm thinking, how the hell is this going to go? And 10 minutes later, it was like watching both Cocoon and Awakenings, the movies, you know, they'd all come to life, you know, because this dopamine had fired up, and suddenly they had stability and flexibility. And even the people that were very advanced with dyskinesia, you know, very animated movements, suddenly their hand-eye coordination was incredible, and they could play rings around me. So a year later, we've been to Portugal, we're going to Germany, and we wouldn't have been doing these without Parkinson's being in our life. So it's keeping John fit, it's helping his medication, it's keeping his symptoms, I think, you know, sort of deteriorating a nice steady pace, you know, so that we don't tend to notice as we go along. And it's opened up a world of opportunity. So sometimes some good can come out of things when you just give a try. But the biggest thing is the social aspect of that, because he is still playing with peers that have the same condition as him. We tend to sort of follow around with them. So I've got my support group from my family and friends of their people with Parkinson's. So it's great for both of us.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's a really positive note for us to end on. So I think it's just for me to say thank you so much, Linda, Matthew, Kate and Sarah. Thank you everybody who's joined us. We will try and pick up some more of your questions and get back to you. And we'll send you the recording, and everybody have a good rest of your evening. Thanks again.